I was recently listening to a tournament player who got into quite the tiz was that tournament games were taking too long. That if only the rules were simpler, then they could play more games. No, yeah, that is like the only solution. It wouldn't be possible to, play something other than 2,000 points. Like the really awesome 1,000 point games that many people play. It is called incursion size. It is very much an option, and unless you have a crippling addiction to Baneblades, then you have all of your favorite units, just not 3 of each. It is good for new players, and at tournaments you can get 5 games in a day instead of 3. Part of the reason I'm concentrating on 1,000 points is because it's quicker for me to playtest lists. Please appreciate the weekends I've given up to play 40k. I truly live a cursed life. That is very much the positive side. 2,000 points bad is a totally different video. You can prefer 2,000 points and I have no real problem with that. Most of the tactics I explain will also work at 2,000 points, just not effectively. This video is focused around 1,000 points and there will be army lists shown off for each of the 4 Adepta Sororitas detachments in the codex. While each army list will work perfectly well in the detachment I tailored it for, many units are interchangeable, as are tactics. After a couple of watches of this video, you should have a better understanding of why the units are included in the army list and, importantly, what their strategic role is within that list. Just taking an army list from the internet, even a tournament-winning one, will not help you if you don't understand what to do with the units, which characters go where, when to use the stratagems, and what to spend miracle dice on. If you have only played larger games, a 1,000 point game will feel familiar, but it's very different. It may take on the feeling of the last few rounds of a 2,000 point game, where your final units try to grab objectives and desperately score points. That is the starting point for 1,000 point games. And I'm assuming you play 2,000 points to completion and don't just stop at round 4 because you ran out of time. Then you should definitely be playing 1,000 points. There will still be exceptions. When I chatted to Arthur Bones, he said that 1,000 points and talking to his opponent will take him 4 hours. So don't worry if you take a long time to play. As long as you and your opponent have fun, all is good. 1,000 points is a tactical challenge. There are 5 objectives, usually. The same number of objectives with 2,000 points. You draw the same number of secondary missions as in a 2,000 point game. The objectives are no closer together than on a 2,000 point game as the board is the same suggested size. So normally, you would try and take as many objectives as you can. But now you will need to try and score the maximum victory points and keep your opponent off objectives. The maximum number of victory points you can score in one turn from primary might be from 2 objectives. So take 2 objectives, and then put effort into preventing your opponent from getting 2 objectives. That may lead to an objective sitting spare the whole game. That has happened to me before at 1,000 points. Having sticky objectives is really valuable as a way to control objectives without needing to dedicate your limited resources to the primary mission. If you're able to field a unit with that ability, like Neophytes or Cablite Warriors, do so. Because you have fewer points to fight with, if you have a screening unit to prevent your units getting charged by pure strain gene stealers on turn 1, make sure it is very cheap, like 50 to 75 points. You can't be spending the same number of points on other things as you would in 2,000 points. You can't just cut a list in half and hope it still works. It is a very different beast. It's a kind of different beast. It's still like a beast you can take down. It's just a different beast to 2,000 points. If you want to know more, this isn't the first time I've talked about playing the Adepta Sororitas at 1,000 points. That video goes a lot more into the principles of list building, while I will now be looking at tailoring tactics to what your favourite detachments can do. As general army list construction, I don't recommend a super powerful but expensive Death Ball unit. If it is destroyed, you are left with very little else to fight the game. Your opponent could ignore the unit and kill the smaller utility and point scoring unit. And that is my tactic when I play the Xenocreed Genestealer cult. But also, you don't want to go too focused on spamming one particular 60 Battle Sisters. Forget anything else. Consider 60 Battle Sisters, the maximum number of Battle Sisters. Yes, you could have another squad of 10 by allying in a unit with the Imperial Agents, but they cost more and don't get access to Miracle Dice. They are not Adepta Sororitas, and they don't have the Acts of Faith army rule. So 60 Battle Sisters. Oh yes, this gives you sticky objectives. This gives you a lot of anti-infantry firepower, and with melter guns at strength 10 in the Bringers of Flame detachment, it gives you some anti-tank. So that is the first detachment we're looking at. We will use a tide of Battle Sisters in the Bringers of Flame detachment. While the Dominions were more popular than Battle Sister squads in the Bringers of Flame detachment, there is now 20 points between them. You could have Dominions instead, but that is 120 points difference on 6 squads. Points will change depending on how far through the edition you are, so rebalancing that in your mind may be dependent on the current situation. But Battle Sisters gain an ability that is wasted on the Dominions. The Bringers of Flame detachment gives you Assault. All but the Sister Superior weapons of the Dominion squad already had Assault. You get faster Battle Sister squads that can move up, use Defenders of the Faith on objectives so that it stays as your objective, and then keep moving forward to block the enemy from getting to the objectives. The volume of bodies prevents deep strike as well. To protect your home objective, it is already sticky, it is already yours. You could include an allied navigator. They have an ability that prevents enemies being set up within 12 inches of them, so no one's going to deploy directly onto the objective. So if the enemy could drop Terminators onto an objective, it won't be your home objective. But if your opponent has indirect fire weapons and manages to kill a navigator and also has a deep striking unit, then the stars have aligned for them, and they probably did this on the turn you had Defend Stronghold as a secondary mission. But remember that if your opponent comes in with Terminators, that is between like 1/5 and 1/4 of their points depending on characters attached. Ignore them, as they are too slow to get to more than one objective, especially compared to your advancing and shooting and sticky objective Battle Sisters. We aren't going to be deep striking in this army list, but we are going to drop in reserves. With Retributors. Transports, well, the Immolator especially, can be expensive, and Rhinos, though cheaper, are still very easy to destroy at 1000 points. So the Retributors will walk on from reserves. These could all have multi-melters to destroy the one big monster or tank the enemy has, or all heavy flamers with a hand flamer on the superior for a nasty strength 7 flame ball, because you get that +1 strength in the Bringers of Flame detachment when you're within 12 inches, which the heavy flamers always are. And with the Cleansing Flame stratagem, you can cause devastating wounds. So this can mess up light vehicles like a Toughness 7 Sentinel, and it does a lot of damage to heavy infantry like Terminators. If you set a fire, you can keep a man warm for a night. If you set a man on fire, he'll be warm for the rest of his life. We can add a Canoness to the Retributors, something we couldn't do in the Index, so that we now get a free stratagem so that we can always have Cleansing Flame. With Heavy Flamers, you will want to be near an enemy that you want dead, but in your opponent's turn, they move another unit closer to kill you, and you can fire Overwatch, which auto-hits because of Torrent. And if you were the second player, it's a new battle round, so the Canoness can use the Overwatch for 1 command point fewer. And finally, the app has been updated to reflect the rules changes for the Canoness that happened in April 2024. These are the tactics you need to know. This is why just reading an army list tells you so little. The Bringers of Flame is probably the only detachment where you would use a miracle dice of a 1 to advance. Then you get to use the Cherub on a Battle Sister squad or Dominion squad or Retributor squad to get a new miracle dice. Other detachments can also have their units do this, but you are giving up on your shooting attacks and a Cherub to do that. Because the Bringers of Flame detachment gives you Assault so that you can advance and shoot, this is a tactic for early game where you need to get the better miracle dice sooner, and there is no sooner time than your first movement phase, assuming you went first. Speed is very important in small games as you have more space to maneuver, and like I mentioned at the start, there may be unclaimed objectives. Bringers of Flame, even Bringers of Flame entirely on foot, which is something I've done before, that lets you advance and remain combat effective at shooting. I don't recommend units that do well in the fight phase in this detachment, because they're getting very little from the detachment rule and very little from the stratagems. And while I generally prefer Hospitallers for preservation, Imagifiers work best in this detachment because they grant a 2+ save to the unit that they lead, and that can stay at a 2+ because of the Shield of Aversion stratagem. AP -1 is still going to be a 2+ save. That is not a lot of dead Battle Sisters. And their aura to give you better miracle dice when units die is useful when you won't have as many miracle dice as, say, the Hallowed Martyrs Detachment with their enhancements, or the Army of Faith. I would put the Imagifier in the Battle Sister squad that's in the center of the board, because that is the unit that's probably going to take the most damage. Although you can see from your opponent's deployment where they're putting their heaviest things, and you can have the Imagifier's unit there to counter it. You can't put the Imagifier in the Retributor squad alongside the Canoness. The Imagifier has an ability to double up with the Canoness, but that is specific only to the Battle Sister squads. Okay, so if those Retributors have heavy flamers, we're going to need some anti-tank. While our Battle Sister squads can have multi-melters, and I do recommend the multi-melters, though it will depend on what you normally face. Storm Bolters and Heavy Bolters are really good at killing Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines. Having more Flamers and Heavy Flamers is good against Hordes, but Melter Weapons will do the job of giving anti-tank at Strength 10 in this detachment, while all of the Bolters can deal with Light Infantry. So I mostly recommend Melter Guns and Multi-Melters in your Battle Sister squads, assuming you have the Multi-Melter parts. If you don't, the Heavy Flamer that comes in the box, if you cut off the barrels and attach some Melter Guns that you wouldn't be using because they're for the Dominions that come in the same kit, you now have a Multi-Melter. It looks functionally the same, but the barrel end will show that it's a Multi-Melter. That's still not quite enough anti-tank. We want some dedicated anti-tank weapons, and I don't mean the anti-vehicle keyword. A unit that can fight the bigger monsters you may face. So we want some Paragon Warsuits. With their Righteous Paragon ability, they get a bonus to hit and a bonus to wound against monsters and vehicles. And they can work very well even without Morwen Val. Having Morwen Val and Paragon Warsuits together is probably too many points for a 1000 point game, because then you have that big death ball that your opponent can mostly ignore and be able to beat your Battle Sister units. If you keep the Paragon Warsuits focused on the biggest enemies, then you should do fine. They have a 2+ save, a 4+ invulnerable save, and a toughness 7. And again, with that Shield of Aversion stratagem, you can keep this squad at a 2+ save, meaning it has immense endurance against the common AP -1 attacks. While you could have one with a Heavy Bolter, one with a Heavy Flamer, and one for a Multi-Melter, for the flavour of the Holy Trinity, Multi-Melters are what you should go for with the Paragon Warsuits. They are dedicated anti-tank things, they have bonuses against monsters and vehicles, you want to have the weapons that will do well against monsters and vehicles. The melee weapons may come down to personal preference, especially like aesthetic preference. Both of them are very good. And I would also take the Paragon Grenade Launchers over the Storm Bolters, because the rest of the army will be dealing with lighter infantry. The Paragon Warsuits are going for the biggest problems. The higher strength we can get, in this case strength 10 grenade launchers, the higher the better. So there are several units that we need just to fight the enemy and not just hold objectives. So 60 Battle Sisters is a little bit silly, but 40 Battle Sisters is perfectly reasonable. Then we have units that can hold objectives, stay on objectives to have the objective control, and then their simulacrum can generate miracle dice, and they can complete secondary missions. To give us another unit for secondary missions, a Lone Dialogus. While they can operate in a unit to give you a guaranteed miracle dice of a 6, so that when you're firing your melter guns and your multi-melters you can do maximum damage, operating alone, they can complete secondary missions, and their 4+ invulnerable save and access to miracle dice means that they're a pain for your opponent to figure out just how much firepower they should dedicate to shooting one white-haired lady with a stick. Like, oh, you did the one shot that's definitely going to kill it. No, I have a miracle dice of a 4, so invulnerable save passed. She sticks around to score me secondary victory points for another turn. So throwing all that together, here is a list for the Bringers of Flame that focuses on a lot of infantry. So we have a Canoness who has a Chainsword, a Brazier of Holy Fire, and a Condemner Bolt Gun. If you want the Brazier of Holy Fire, you have to have a Chainsword. That's just how the weapon options work for the Canoness at the moment. But that is another torrent weapon that can be using devastating wounds from the Cleansing Flame stratagem. And the Condemner Bolt Gun is always providing devastating wounds, so that's even more devastating wounds for your Retributor unit. The 5 Retributors, 4 of them have heavy flamers, and the Superior can have a hand flamer and a power sword. Don't forget that when you're firing them, they always reroll wound rolls of 1, and if they're targeting a unit that's already killed one of your Battle Sister squads or your Lone Dialogus, you get to fully reroll the wound rolls. That can be especially good when you have the devastating wounds and can try and get as many 6s as possible. There are 40 Battle Sisters. For the weapons, you can have whatever you want, really. Melter weapons are what I recommend, so it'll be 1 melter gun, 1 multi-melter, and why not an Inferno pistol on the superior? Because the Inferno pistol is short range. You could go for a plasma pistol, then you are always at strength 8, regardless of whether you're overcharging or not, or you could go for a hand flamer, which becomes strength 5 in this detachment. The Imagifier has no weapon options, but will be joining one of the Battle Sister squads, the one that's most likely to be taking the most damage. The Dialogus has no weapon options, but can go alone, or if you see that your opponent has not that many units, and you will have a lot of units of your own being able to be left alone to complete missions, then you could put the Dialogus in one of the Battle Sister squads. The 3 Paragon Warsuits want multi-melters, and then it's your choice of Paragon Blade or Paragon War Mace. And the Navigator sits all alone as an allied unit. That is 995 points after the October Munitorum Field Manual points update. So it's not quite 60 Battle Sisters. Let's move on and do something totally different with the Hallowed Martyrs Detachment. 60 Battle Sisters! Okay, that's the last time I'll recommend it, but it's a good start. If you wanted to buy 60 Battle Sisters, or a lesser number of them, or one of the very expensive per model boxes like the Seraphim, please use my affiliates if you can. You have Fenris Workshop in Canada, Gap Games in Australia and New Zealand, Kutami in Europe, War Games Portal in the United States, and Firestorm Games in the UK. All of them are cheaper than going through Games Workshop, and buying anything from them through the links in the description supports the channel financially. If you wanted to buy some Infinity models from Gap Games, that also helps. Many of the tactics and unit choices could be used in other detachments. If you are really into the Hallowed Martyrs, as you loved Our Martyred Lady, and wanted to be as thematically close to them as possible, think about how you would play my suggested roster for Bringers of Flame in the Hallowed Martyrs. Would anything work badly? Would new combos be opened up? The Hallowed Martyrs likes big units of 10 sisters. 5 Retributors can be easily taken out, and there is very little margin for error between being below half strength and just being wiped out. Killing 10 sisters takes more effort, so there is more likelihood of them being alive and below half strength, certainly below starting strength to get +1 to hit. If you lose a few models from a sister squad, Praise the Fallen gives you a round of shooting at normal ballistic skill. If you have a Dominion squad with Flamers, you could also do an effective Overwatch, and now you are getting essentially 3 rounds of shooting from a unit in 1 battle round. As we lack the speed of the Bringers of Flame detachment, a Rhino or Immolator is a good choice. An Immolator that gets +1 to hit on the multi-melters after taking at least a single wound is valuable. The Rhino can provide speed much cheaper. Think of the economy. When transporting Dominions, the Rhino can scout and get to an objective quickly, ready to score in the next turn. If the Rhino is blown up, and it probably will be, that spills the unit inside onto the objective. Battle Sisters are a good option for the high objective control, but I'm thinking of Dominions. If one of them dies because the transport was destroyed with them still inside, or through emergency disembarkation, the rest of the unit is now at +1 to hit on their melter guns, so they hit on a 2+, and the combi weapon on the superior hits on a 3+. Despite transports working best in the Bringers of Flame detachment because of the associated stratagems, battle tanks do well in Hallowed Martyrs. You lose some wounds on a lone vehicle, it now has +1 to hit. This is going to work better on frontline tanks like the Castigator than an Exorcist that stays safe at the back. Oh, and if that battle tank is destroyed near to the enemy because they got charged, pop goes the Castigator or Mortifier with Sanctified Immolation. One of the best Palatine combos is in this detachment. It was called the Blade of St. Eleanor in the Index, the namesake is now in the Army of Faith, and we will look at that shortly. Through Suffering Strength is the enhancement that gives you an extra attack, an extra strength, and an extra damage on the bearer's melee weapons. When fighting bigger infantry or things that look more like beasts, such as Possessed, they could become less of a problem if you have damage 3 attacks. And if the bearer has lost 1 or more wounds, you get 2 extra strength, 2 more attacks, and move up to damage 4 on your Palatine's weapon. But how could we make that happen? It isn't like you can will the enemy to attack you with precision. But it is possible to overcharge your own plasma pistol. The Palatine has 4 wounds, so the 3 damage from the hazardous plasma pistol would bring her to 1 wound. Certainly she has lost 1 or more wounds, and if she was then the only model left in her unit, the Palatine is now also below half strength, which grants her +1 to wound. 6 strength 6 AP -2 damage for attacks with +1 to wound will hurt everything the enemy could throw at you. Who would be opposed to hitting a war dog and wounding on a 4+? As long as 3 attacks get through, it dies. This is a risk. If you're on 1 wound, any enemy character can slap you with the epic challenge stratagem and feel confident in taking you down. That would suck so much, except it wouldn't. We have the divine intervention stratagem. Discard 1 miracle dice and the Palatine comes back on 1 wound at the end of the phase. We are back, and at optimum damage output. Don't worry if you didn't have a miracle dice when the Palatine went down, she generated one when she was destroyed, which can be used to then bring her back at 1 wound. There is another reason that you should use through suffering strength on the Palatine rather than any other character. If you discard a miracle dice for rapturous blows, every one of her attacks that succeeds at the wound roll causes 1 mortal wound after regular damage. The Palatine can cause extra mortal wounds up to the number of attacks she has, so any enhancement that increases the number of attacks is also increasing her mortal wounds output. Novitiates are a good unit for the Palatine to lead. They're 100 points for 10 models. They have low armor save compared to other sisters of 4+, so they die easily, which gets you below half strength quickly. With the Palatine, the Novitiates lose Infiltrate, but they gain lethal hits from the Palatine and also give the Palatine re-roll hit rolls of 1. When you hit on a 2+ normally, that covers all of your bases. And importantly, the Sacred Banner to re-roll charges. We do not want our Palatine to be left in the open, so a free re-roll has you covered. If you wanted, you could roll a charge, and if it is failed, on the re-roll, substitute in a high miracle dice. You can use miracle dice as part of a re-roll. Games Workshop has confirmed this. So this is 1,000 points with the Hallowed Martyrs. There are 10 Dominions with Flamers. This means if the enemy moves close, you can overwatch them, and you're going to be hitting with those torrent weapons, and then reactive move to safety. You could do that in either order. You can do 2 reactions to an enemy movement. And don't forget to praise the Fallen in the enemy shooting phase if you can. This unit is potentially more active in your opponent's turn than your own. So 4 Flamers and a Hand Flamer on the Superior. Another unit of 10 Dominions acts as an Armoured Fist. There are 4 Melter Guns and a combi weapon in a Rhino. This is the unit that's going to be potentially taking damage when the Rhino is destroyed, so then we have a better chance of hitting with the Melter Guns. We have 1 Battle Sister squad, which could have melter weapons as well, melter gun, multi-melter. It's entirely up to you what weapons you equip with the Battle Sister squad. Their job is to sticky the home objective and then move up to the next objective. As the Dominions have cleared one objective, the Battle Sisters move up to take it so that the Dominions can move on. There's a second Battle Sister squad to do much the same, but they can start closer to one of the objectives. They should probably have melter weapons to have a go at anti-tank. Even though we're not Bringers of Flame and we don't have Strength 10 melter weapons, if you have a 5 or a 6, that is good for a wound roll against a tank as long as that vehicle doesn't have an invulnerable save, then you can be pretty confident you're doing damage to it. There is a lone Ministorum Priest with Saintly Example, doing the same job as the Dialogus in the previous list. Same number of wounds, same 4+ invulnerable save, but with the Zealot's Vindicta so that they can fight if needed. Once per game they fight really well with the Zealot ability, but really, they complete secondary missions, and if they die, good. The model has Saintly Example and generates an additional D3 miracle dice on top of the normal one once they die. You could put them in the Dominion Flamer squad if you want. Due to Holy Mission as a rule, the Dominions could keep Scout. But I intended the Priest to go alone and score victory points. In something like a Crusade game that has no secondary mission cards, they don't need to go alone. A Castigator provides more reliable anti-tank shots than the melter guns of the Sisters. You could have either turret, the twin autocannons or the battle cannon. I have come to prefer the battle cannon, but in the Bringers of Flame, where getting close gives you extra strength, they're the twin autocannons. There is very little difference, and I wouldn't want to call either of them the best. A Mortifier, or the Penitent engines generally, are good in this detachment when taken as a unit of 1. If there was 2, you will never get below half strength, because you would lose 1 and be below starting strength at half strength, which is not the same as being below half strength. But a single mortifier is good for this detachment's Blood of Martyrs rule, as I would describe a mortifier as easy to wound, annoying to kill. They can have a 3+ save with an Ancon Right sarcophagus. For weapons, I would take the twin buzz blades for some needed anti-tank, so we aren't just relying on the Palatine for combat attacks. I would say also heavy bolters, because they will benefit from +1 to hit, whereas the heavy flamers will not. So that has value. The mortifier can just sit on an objective and provide long-range heavy bolter attacks, or it can move up and do combat attacks. It depends where your sisters are and if your sisters are still alive. Hopefully they can get to an objective and make it sticky before they die. And to round out the list, we have the Palatine with Through Suffering Strength and 10 Novitiates. You can have them all with close combat weapons. You can have 2 with flamers if you like. They definitely want a Simulacrum, and they definitely want a Sacred Banner. And the Superior, because there's very little in the weapons, like there's obviously the best ones for the profile. If you're not going to do something fluffy, the Sister Superior has a Power Sword and a Plasma Pistol. For fluffiness, you don't take plasma weapons, as they are not part of the Holy Trinity. So this list has some combat, and you have some guns. It is a nice balanced list. The Hallowed Martyrs is good for that, where the Bringers of Flame is very shooting focused. But let's look instead at just the fight phase for Sisters of Battle, but using the Army of Faith. This Army of Faith list is much more of a close combat approach, using our fighter units that don't have the Penitent keyword, because they're going to be in the Penitent Host. I would like to introduce you to the Assassin Palatine. Just changing the enhancement entirely changes the role of the Palatine compared to the brute force of the Hallowed Martyrs Palatine. This is the new Blade of St. Eleanor. The Palatine already has close combat attacks that are AP -2, the sword makes you go up by another 1, and with the Divine Guidance stratagem, that takes it up another 1 to AP -4. Killing characters, who may have invulnerable saves, is optional with your precision attacks. You can just scythe through Chaos Marines who would not get an armor save at AP -4. And as long as you kill 1 model, the Blade generates a miracle dice, and the Divine Guidance stratagem generates another miracle dice. Precision is underrated. If you attack a Necron Wraith unit with a Technomancer and bop him on the head, no more feel no pain. No more returning extra wounds to that Wraith unit, and no more whatever enhancement he has once your unit's attacks have finished. The mortal wounds from Rapturous Blows don't get assigned to characters through precision. Mortal wounds are assigned like any other normal attack. To have a little bit of a cheaper bodyguard, I went with Combat Celestians. 4 of them have halberds, as they have lethal hits from the Palatine already, and so we want to pick the weapon that has sustained hits instead. There's no point doubling up. The AP -2 can be boosted to AP -3. Don't feel too bad about not having the damage 2 of the mace. You have 1 Spear of the Faithful, which is damage 2. The weapons don't matter too much, because they are a cheap delivery vehicle for the Palatine that can complement her combat ability. Remember that with Sworn Protectors, they are -1 to be wounded. Novitiates are an alternate combat choice, but they are 25 points more. This is a unit that can come on from reserve if there's not enough terrain to get them safely up the board, and you could place them in reserve and rapid ingress so that you are ready to charge the enemy's prized character. Although we're not in the Penitent Host, I have picked some combat Arcoflagellants, and they can have AP -1 with Divine Guidance, and Lance with another stratagem if they didn't already have +1 to wound from a priest. This detachment can go deep into the AP with shooting as well as close combat fighting. You have the stratagem for extra AP. The Castigator gives you an extra armor penetration for shooting. If you are 6 inches up on a ruin, that is plunging fire. Another AP. And if you're using the rules for Hymns of Battle found in White Dwarf 505, another point of armor penetration. Oh, the joys of AP -4 bolt guns. But we have many other shenanigans. And I do so love shenanigans. The 5 Zephyrim Sisters can form a line to provide auras. And if you needed to move them to get behind enemy lines, Angelic Descent is a stratagem to take them off the board and put them somewhere else. With fewer units available at 1,000 points, but still needing to do all of the things, the Zephyrim are a do-it-all unit in this detachment. They provide blinding radiance to protect your army, that's why we lined them up behind our units. They can jump away to score secondary objectives, like behind enemy lines at short notice, and they can charge directly into the enemy unit on an objective. Their banner lets them reroll charges, and with the help of a jump cannoness, probably with a halberd, and the lethal hits or sustained hits that apply to their own power weapons, you can kill the enemy. If you need more punch, I hope you have some miracle dice spare, and you should. Then you can have both lethal hits and sustained hits. And don't forget, extra AP is an option. I mean, this is maybe my favourite stratagem in this whole detachment. And you can also have Lance. So this is a very command point hungry detachment because of how much you will want to use Blinding Radiance and Divine Guidance. So Junith and a Cannoness or Jump Pack Cannoness are good choices. Cannonesses give you a free stratagem per battle round, and Junith gives you an extra command point for sure if you discard one of our many miracle dice. As Junith provides a natural -1 to hit for a unit, that is a unit that can start behind our main force and sticky the home objective with some battle sisters before moving on to the next objective, while the jump pack units are protecting the rest of our army using that blinding radiant stratagem. And although I'm looking at this with a combat style for the detachment, I am not going to miss an Exorcist. You have the Exorcist missile launcher, and with the Army of Faith, you can perform 2 miracles per phase per unit, so spend a 5 or a 6 to get the max damage from 2 of your attacks that successfully wounded. Or spend a 2 to make sure that sodding hunter-killer missile actually hits. So this is my Faith in the Blade 1000 points for the Army of Faith. We have Junith Arutia leading 10 Battle Sisters. The 10 sisters want to have a heavy flamer, and a hand flamer, so that with Junith's flamers, that is a powerful overwatch. You can get a spare hand flamer from the Seraphim set, from the Sacrosanct, or by cutting off the end of a combi flamer and putting it on the end of a bolt pistol. That looks fine. We have the Palatine with the Blade of St. Eleanor and 5 Sacrosancts, and we have a jump cannoness leading 5 Zephyrim. The halberd may be the best choice for her. You could have the power weapon and flamer, then the power weapon that she's using also gets the bonuses of the Zephyrim. But we don't need the hand flamer. I would maybe save that for leading Seraphim in the Bringers of Flame detachment. With an extra 10 points, the jump cannoness has the Litanies of Faith, so you can take a leadership test to generate an extra miracle dice. This could then be fed directly into Junith in the same phase to become a command point. The other 10 sisters are going to want melter weapons. While skipping this unit entirely and making the Zephyrim into a unit of 10 or taking 5 Seraphim instead are tempting, we need our objectives covered. The Zephyrim aura can protect this unit and the Arco-Flagellants as well to get to objectives in the open. And don't forget that you can use miracle dice for advance rolls if you need to get to an objective quickly or for just passing saves. There are 10 Arco-Flagellants led by a Ministorum Priest. While we have Lance from the Faith and Fury stratagem, the Priest saves us needing to use it, and it will work even when not charging. +1 to wound and the Divine Guidance stratagem for AP -1, with 6 attacks from the Extremist trigger word, you'll be smashing not just light infantry, but light tanks and heavy infantry. And I prefer the Zealot's Vindictor for the Ministorum Priest. And to finish the list, we perfect it with an Exorcist. This is a combat-oriented Army of Faith list. Think of what this list could do in the other detachments. It would be pretty weak in the Bringers of Flame because lethal hits for 1 command point is all they have to offer combat units. But in the Hallowed Martyrs detachment, you have the Spirit of the Martyr to fight on death if your Sacrosancts or Zephyrim got jumped on before you were ready. Righteous Vengeance lets you always reroll hit rolls, great for the Arco-Flagellants, and they were likely to already take a casualty or 2 before getting into combat, so the detachment rule would give them +1 to hit. If they hadn't lost anyone, maybe you will after the hazardous test from the Extremist trigger word. But under the current version of the rules, you can take Feel No Pain saves against hazardous, so maybe nobody dies. But the Arco-Flagellants should work best in the true combat detachment, the Penitent Host. The Penitent Host needs to hit hard and fast because the vows have to work in battle rounds 1, 2, and 3. It isn't just really bad wording. The FAQ says it is intended to be battle rounds 1, 2, and 3, and you have to pick a vow for each of them. The Triumph of St. Catherine is a great way to get that racing game speed boost for your combat units, but it is too many points for a 1000 point game. If it costs 250 points, it may cost too many points for a lot of people in a 2000 point game. It used to cost 125 points. And it is a speed funnel, encouraging your units to close in around it. But with fewer units at 1000 points than 2000 points, you need to spread out for board control, not clump up around one unit. The Penitent Host is probably the only detachment that you can't use an army list from the other detachments and have it work pretty well here. But this detachment makes you think of the general good things you get from a lot of our Adepta Sororitas units. So the Immolator, it splits a unit. Splitting a Battle Sister unit will give you a second unit with the sticky objectives rule. That's awesome. You don't need to feel as bad you aren't including 60 Battle Sisters and are instead focusing on the Penitent units as you should. So one Immolator splits a Battle Sister squad, half go in the Immolator, they have to, and the other half have the Simulacrum and that stays on the home objective. It is sticky, so you keep it if they get shot and the Simulacrum can keep generating miracle dice. The way that it works currently, you roll 1d6. On a 1 to 3, you don't get a miracle dice. A 4 to 6 gives you a good miracle dice of the corresponding value. A 4, 5 or 6 equal to what you rolled. I keep seeing people doing it wrong. And when you split a unit with the Immolator, these are entirely separate units, one split, and have no bearing on each other for the rest of the game. So in the Hallowed Martyrs, if one of the half units lost a model, only that unit with 4 models left would get the +1 to hit from the Blood of Martyrs. The other 5 sister unit would not be affected at all and would be considered at full strength while there are 5 of them left. Unlike previously, the Cherub as a unit ability no longer applies to each half of the unit. The FAQ counteracts the rule as written, and the 1 Cherub marker goes with 1 sister unit. I would put that with the Special Weapon, Heavy Weapon and Superior in the Immolator, not the 5 sisters with Bolters and a Simulacrum on your home objective. The Cherub does not take up space, it is a reminder token, not an actual in-game model. With a second Immolator, you can split a Dominion squad. I would have the 4 special weapons and the Simulacrum and Cherub go in the Immolator. If there are no characters attached, the Immolator can scout, which lets you have early speed to get to an objective. Or if you misplace it during deployment, let it sneak back a bit behind terrain so that it won't get shot immediately. The other 5 Dominions, which are the Superior and 4 other sisters, are going to be a cheap screen. Screening units have to be cheap in 1000 point games, and half of a unit is considered cheap. Scouting units make for a good screen against super fast moving enemies and enemy units with infiltrate. Pure Strain Gene Stealers tick both boxes. The 5 Dominions can move up to stop more fragile units like Repentia from dying. From dying too soon. If the Dominions survive combat, same for the Battle Sisters, with Boundless Zeal, they can fall back and shoot. Or, Battle Sisters could fall back and charge a weak enemy on an objective just so their Objective 2 bodies take that objective from your opponent. It is an option, but that is the only stratagem that will work for them. Immolators can also use the stratagem if you wanted to move them out of combat to get a firing line on something they couldn't shoot at with big guns never tire. Unless that situation comes up, Boundless Zeal works best on the Penitent engine, which has good flamers and can charge back in to fight first. Because that's what happens when you charge. You can't advance when you fall back. A fallback move is different to an advance move, so their endless suffering won't trigger. We only have 1 Battle Sister squad in this army. I know. How can we cope when 60 sisters is now a distant dream? Well, with a stratagem. One that lets a Penitent unit make an objective sticky with their blood. The objective secured thing. It is yours until the enemy takes it from you. While it can be used on any Penitent unit, I found it works best on Mortifiers. Even outside of the Death Before Disgrace vow being active, they fight on death. As long as your opponent knows that, and you should tell them that out of courtesy, so your opponent will want to shoot them to death instead of stabbing them to death. If they are shot to death, then that means there are no enemies nearby to control the objective instead of you. Final Redemption lets you hold that objective beyond death. There's a unit of 5 Repentia that come on from reserves. We're not investing loads into this, but it should work if you have a miracle die of 6. Use it on the charge roll. If the other dice rolled is a 3+, you made it into combat from reserves. You can't use 2 miracle dice on a charge roll, just 1. If you fail, you have command reroll, but you would need to use a new miracle dice. And be in the Army of Faith detachment or near the Triumph of St. Catherine so that you can use more than 1 miracle dice on that unit in the same phase. Having the Repentia come on from a flank is cheaper than buying a Rhino. If you don't have a miracle dice of a 6, use Rapid Ingress, arrive out of line of sight, and then in your following turn, move your 7 inches and charge your enemy of choice. Don't do this to anything with Torrent or Overwatch will just kill you. As a life lesson, don't stand in fire. If you face Overwatch attacks anyway from non-torrent weapons, take the saves on the Superior because she has an armor save. I know you lose the rerolls if she dies, but every successful armor save is protecting a Repentia with an Eviscerator, and the Superior also has the 5+ Feel No Pain. I know that the best damage dealing option is for 10 Repentia and a Palatine with Catechism of Divine Penitence to join the unit, and then be in a Rhino for protection, and then get out and charge, and in combat use Passion of the Penitent so that the natural sustained hits as well as the Palatine's lethal hits can activate on a 5+. And with all the rerolls from the Repentia Superior, you can take down a Knight. This is a combo that costs 325 points. And you are unlikely to be facing a big Imperial or Chaos Knight in a 1000 point game. You get 1 shot with that unit, and if you don't make your points back, you lose the game shortly after losing a third of your army. A Ministorum Priest could have Catechism of Divine Penitence to join the Repentia and give them +1 to wound, but the Priest is more effective in Arcoflagellant units where there are no pre-existing rerolls, like the ones the Repentia Superior provides to her Repentia. So we have a Priest and Arcoflagellants running screaming at the enemy, and they can run. From the Path of the Penitent Vow, +3 inches move, and Lash of Guilt for 1 command point will let you advance and charge. This isn't quite a first turn charge if you go first, but turn 1 you can move 10 inches +d6 and get to cover on the midboard for a second turn charge. As a quick rundown of the vows, it will depend on the unfolding battlefield situation you are in, but going top to bottom worked fine for me. Round 1, Path of the Penitent. Round 2, Absolution in battle so that charging Arcoflagellants and Repentia from reserves get an extra attack and strength. And then round 3, Death before Disgrace so that we die hard. This is very upsetting for enemies that don't have an ability to fall back and still shoot. This is our army list roundup for the Penitent Host. We have 2 Immolators with multi-melters because Flamers are covered for by the Penitent engines. We have the Battle Sister Squad. Yeah, it doesn't overly matter too much which weapons you have, but I would go for the Melter weapons because they're good against heavy infantry, while our Arcoflagellants are good against light infantry. And yes, the Melter weapons can have a good go at attacking tanks and vehicles and monsters and such. The 10 Dominions in another Immolator. This time I went for a mix of 1 Flamer, 1 Hand Flamer and 3 Melter Guns. Honestly, for no other reason than I fancied mixing it up and I liked the pose of those models on the day. There are 5 Repentia that are going to be in reserve, and a Penitent engine which is going to rush at the enemy if there isn't a screen there, and they can advance and charge turn 1. The Buzzblades and Flamers are best. And with the Mortifier, Buzzblades are best for damage 2 and high strength, which is good for anti-tank. You can have one of each weapon, the Flail and the Buzzblade, so that you can choose which to attack with, but I prefer having twin-linked on the Buzzblades. A miracle die of a 3 can help you make a hit roll, then the twin-linked will help you with the wound rolls. The Mortifiers hold objectives and can just be a pain to shift at 1000 points. There are 3 Arcoflagellants which hold objectives as they move up behind the Dominion Immolator, allowing the tank to move on to the next objective or enemy target, and the objective can be held by the 6 wounds and Feel No Pain and Invulnerable save of the Arcoflagellants. And there are 2 Crusaders which can complete actions and secondary missions and take over holding an objective for a Mortifier. If you don't play with Legends, you are missing out and would have to return to the Lone Dialogus, which also costs 40 points. And the really big punch of this detachment at 1000 points are 10 Arcoflagellants with a Ministorum Priest. The Ministorum Priest could join a Dominion or Battle Sister squad, As the priest has the penitent keyword, this does some interesting things. It won't give the sister squad the benefit of the vows because they refer specifically to models with the penitent keyword. That would only be the priest model. But it would make it a penitent unit because of how shared keywords work. So the unit could fall back and shoot and charge with Boundless Zeal, or advance and charge with Lash of Guilt. But if the stratagem refers only to penitent models like Passion of the Penitent, that is just the priest model, not the battle sister models. This Ministorum priest would have a power weapon and holy pistol. Because I'm thinking, that is the one you get in the Penitent Host Christmas box for 2024. It gives you that priest, 2 walkers, 2 rhinos, 10 arcoflagellants and 10 repentia. It is very much the core of the Penitent Host. So that is one way you could start collecting Adepta Sororitas using that detachment. If you have very few units and want 1,000 points as a good start or an end goal for the Adepta Sororitas army, here are 4 more ways to start collecting Adepta Sororitas, and it comes with more potential army lists for a 1,000 point army. Have a great day with your sisters in 40k.